What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. I know it's been absolutely ages since I've uploaded on this channel, but I thought it's about time. So as you guys know, recently I built my own PC, and this is kind of a tutorial for those who need to choose parts for theirs. And as a bonus, on the side I've got photos of the actual components which I chose. So let's get straight in. So the main part of your entire system, especially if you're doing something more processing heavy, is your CPU. This is kind of like the brains of your system. It should be used for calculating tasks and doing other things. And it kind of controls everything in your PC, hence why it's such an important component. For gaming, this component should be around a quarter of your entire budget. For example, my budget was 800, so I spent about 200 on my CPU. So, for different brands, there are two main competitors, AMD and Intel, and they have different socket types depending on what generation they are. For example, the Intel 12th gen ones come with LGA 1700 sockets, and the Ryzen 5800 Ryzen ones, pretty much since the start of Ryzen, have all been on AM4, so it's much easier if you go down the Ryzen path. Nowadays, the gap is closing and competition is really tense, to be honest, because they are all putting out such great products. So whilst I can't personally say what you should choose, you should require a bit more research on that. In my opinion, I went with Ryzen because it's simply much better for your money. But nowadays with Intel 12th gen, once their motherboard prices and RAM prices come down, it would honestly be a really good decision. So now to move on for your motherboard. Your motherboard doesn't really have a set share of your budget like the CPU or GPU would. Instead, it should be something which is around half the price of your CPU, but it more depends on what feature set you want. You should never be overspending on aesthetics. That topic carries on throughout the rest of this video. But I also reckon that you shouldn't cheap out. Like, make sure you have good VRM cooling, which is like cooling for the voltage regulation modules of your motherboard. The cooler in some cases comes included with your CPU, but I would very much recommend buying a different one. Personally, I've got an AIO, which is a kind of liquid cooler, but you don't have to do like the filling up of the liquid or the reservoir or any of that. That all comes included. It's quite a simple installation. Air coolers are perfectly fine. Noctua makes some amazing air coolers, but it's really down to what you believe is good for your budget, in terms of the cooler at least. Now for your GPU, these things are so difficult to find. It's almost, if you were asking for this for Christmas, you were better off asking for something like a unicorn, to be honest. They are constantly being scalped nowadays, which means that they're getting sold for way higher than they're actually worth. And personally, I feel like the situation right now is slightly getting better, but I would definitely wait for a bit if you were to buy this component. It should take about half of your budget, and for this component specifically, buying used isn't all that bad, because some of the older generations of GPUs are really beasts when it comes to gaming or just general tasks like rendering. However, I cannot stress this enough. Make sure you aren't getting scalped. You should not be buying for over 1.5 times the MSRP of the budget product, and you should be ideally aiming to go around the RRP of the component. Now for RAM, the prices of RAM has really been going down quite a lot nowadays. And ideally, if your budget is over £400 or £500, you should be going for at least 16 gigabytes, if not 32, for those with more money to spend. It's quite cheap, and as for the other components, you should not make aesthetics your main priority unless you really have a lot of money. Of course, I would say for different situations, you should have different amounts. For gaming, 16 gigabytes is the sweet spot. However, if you were doing something more processing heavy, 32 gigabytes is almost a must in that area. 8 gigabytes will get you past your normal tasks, and 4 is almost unusable nowadays. With many things such as Chrome themselves taking up that much, which honestly is disappointing that they aren't able to properly optimize it enough, but hopefully this will get better in the future. Now for your power supply. This is also called the PSU. You should not cheap out on this whatsoever, because a dead power supply could lead to many of your other components being dead as well. You can always use power supply wattage calculators to decide how much of a wattage you need. I would say definitely, especially for expandability, go around 600 watts. I went for 650, and that works perfectly fine and gives me a solid upgrade path in the future. There are 3 types of power supply. There's modular, which means that these cables can come out completely, and you can really choose which ones you need. I would definitely say you need the PCIe one, the 8-pin CPU one, and you need the 24-pin ATX, along with many systems nowadays requiring some SATA data power. However, that is not always necessary. You also have semi-modular, which means that the necessary ones are already plugged in, but maybe there are some unnecessary ones which are already there. And then there's just the standard ones, which don't have any modularity whatsoever. You can't take them out. All of the ones are already there, and it makes cable managing way harder. Although I don't think this is a make or break situation. Now for storage. Nowadays it really is the best to go with an SSD. That's because SSDs are generally much faster than hard drives. Hard drives are really good for mass storage if you need 1 terabyte plus, that kind of stuff, but they're quite slow nowadays due to the fact that they use a mechanical disk. If you are going with an SSD, M.2s are perfect because the prices are very similar to the SATA ones, and they are much faster. Personally, I went with an M.2, and I can really see the benefits after going from a hard drive to this. You should at least get 250 gigabytes. Ideally 500, no matter what you are going for. And I would say, some people may disagree with me on this, but I would say have 2 drives. Have 1 mass storage and have 1 main drive. Unfortunately, right now I only have 1 main drive, and I'm planning on going up to a mass storage one as well alongside it, probably a hard drive. Now, for the case. This component is really not the most necessary. Of course, you need to have it to connect all your components, but it's mostly for aesthetics, so you don't want to overspend here at all. You'll notice that I've been saying the same thing over and over again. If it's for aesthetics, make sure you're not overspending unless you really have that budget to spare. Ideally, this is the one you want to choose last. You don't want to be working around this one for your budgeting. And honestly, it's quite simple, to be honest. You just choose what you like. It's very much a subjective matter. Now for the bonus section, benchmarking. Once you've put your entire PC together, you want to benchmark it at least a couple of times to make sure that it is working at its rated performance. Personally, I performed so much optimizing on mine because originally there were some settings which I had turned on thinking that they would be good, like something called Game Boost on the MSI BIOS, which is the basic input-output system. And I thought that would be really helpful. Apparently, it just wasn't, to be honest. It was quite detrimental to my performance. So I decided to turn that off, and I boosted that performance so high. I may make an overclocking tutorial later on. However, that is more of a slightly advanced thing to do. So for now, that's all for today. Hope you guys enjoyed this. So see ya.